Yeah. Hello and welcome to the Auto Limits, where we are continuing our quest to get belatedly continuing our quest to get a fuller understanding of the works of Samuel Fuller. I am your host, Craig, and with me, as ever, is my co-host, Rob. Hello, Rob.
Hello, Craig. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Massively out of practice with this.
Yeah, we've not done the last one was the big red one, and that was quite some time ago.
Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. For whatever reason, we haven't sat down to do this for a little while. It's nice to get back to it, though.
It is. It's nice to watch White Dog, which is the subject of today's episode.
God, this is you can feel the gears are starting to turn, starting to get smoother here now. We'll be slick before you know it. Yeah, we're here to talk today about White Dog, a 1982 film, uh, immediate follow up. Well, no, the immediate follow up to the Big Red One. Um, so yeah, and possibly Sam Fuller's second most famous, well, maybe not second, but it's certainly one of his more famous films. Certainly the first one, when I said Sam Fuller to somebody, first time I said Sam Fuller to somebody outside of my film studies modules, the first film they brought up was White Dog, and partly based on its reputation as well, which I'm sure we'll go into in a little bit.
That's really interesting because it was. I'm sure you'll cover this in a bit more depth. For people joining us for the first time, Craig does have the biography, right?
Yeah.
Is that the one? Is the one you've got the one that's called like "If You Die, I'll Kill You"? That one.
No, that is that's I don't know if that's a biography or if that is a Donald Ritchie style appreciation. This is called, what's it called? I've got it open on my little e-reader. So, and I'm not.
But while you're looking at that, I was going to say, I'm sure you've got some context in the book that you pull
A
from.
third
But
face.
one of
It's
the
called
things
a third face.
okay, great. So a third face. So when I'm sure you've got some more sort of context for it, but my understanding for this one is that it was not released really until about 2008, even though it was made in 1982. So it's interesting that it already has a reputation since 2008, that it's one of the more famous ones.
Absolutely. I was thinking about this a little bit, and it's exactly for that reason. I'll go into more detail about it in a bit, but it was shelved for a long time and then only ever seen in art house cinemas. And so it had a mystique. And I was thinking about this in terms. Of obviously with Halloween coming up and there's a new Exorcist film and all that kind of stuff. I was thinking about, been meaning to rewatch The Exorcist and thinking about the way that or Straw Dogs or Clockwork Orange had a mystique, especially in Britain in the 90s, because you couldn't get hold of these things. And I think White Dog had that sort of mystique for some people. Obviously not as well known as any of those, but it certainly came from that kind of time when you couldn't get your hands on everything. Or there wasn't a million different ways to get your hands on everything. And so it just kind of, its reputation grew by whispers and snatches of information, really. So yeah, when I first heard of it, it was kind of, oh, is that racist film that was banned? Which is kind of the reputation it had for quite a while. But yeah, we'll go into it. I mean, so the concept, I mean, I think it's fair to say that this is, if this was made now, I could sort of see it as like what would be described as maybe like a elevated horror film. Do you know what I mean? I could see
an A24, isn't it? It could be an A24.
Absolutely. And it's got some basically horror sequences that feel a little John Carpenter or something like that. Anyway, the concept is that there's a young actor and she comes across this dog, injures it, takes it in, nurses it, tries to find the owner to no avail, and basically adopts this dog not realizing that it's been trained by its racist owner to attack black people. So yeah, she's got this dog in her house. It's perfectly lovely towards her, saves her from an intruder, but is also a vicious killer. And then when she discovers this, she tries to she takes the dog to animal trainers for the film industry, and says, look, can you fix this dog? And it sort of goes on from there, and then it's a tight 90-minute kind of thriller with your usual kind of Sam Fuller bombastic kind of politics thrown into it, isn't it? What did you think of it?
Yeah, I really liked it overall. It's got that thing that we've talked about in all of these so far, which is that quality of Fuller's directness.
Yeah,
like he doesn't really go in for nuance. He doesn't really have time for nuance, and I think that's something that actually the point of the film, that it's a perfect match of filmmaker and like story or theme, because we know that Fuller has like no patience at all for Nazis, fascists, racists. He also, we know from our previous exploration, doesn't have any time for kind of woolly liberal ideas either. He's very kind of like he's an equal opportunities hater, isn't he, really?
pretty much.
And
Yeah.
and I think because of this, the view of the film makes a lot of sense if you view it through that lens of kind of understanding Fuller, of attaining a fuller understanding, as we've sought to do, because it is very much a movie where the point is, and this comes from the original book written by a guy called, I think, Romain Gary, who's a French author, about a time when he was married to Jean Seberg, I think, who was star Breathless, and apparently they adopted a dog and had this kind of similar situation without the death, I imagine. But they had a similar situation with this dog that had been trained to attack black people. And apparently in Gary's book, it's very critical of both, racism, institutional racism, and also kind of liberals who kind of make liberals who are kind of anti-racist, but I guess in a way that people like Fuller and perhaps this woman Gary find annoying. Like apparently the book sort of takes aim at that, and it feels like that in the film. If you say to somebody, well, the point of this movie is racism can't be cured. It's just, if something's racist, like this dog is, you can't fix it. You just got to shoot it in the head. That's something that to me sounds really pessimistic and not very nice. Doesn't necessarily jive with my worldview, but it makes complete sense in the context of Sam Fuller, because that is kind of his worldview, right? Like his worldview would be like, why are you trying to talk this Nazi out of being a Nazi? Shoot them. But
Yeah.
that is kind of Fuller worldview.
Well, you know, that's what he spent 4 years of his life doing, wasn't it? And
Exactly.
seeing the liberating the camps and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So he's
and-
got no time for it.
And not only that, I mean, if we cast your mind back, like the circumstances, how much he was that much older when he signed up as well, and went completely out of his own free will in order to sort of, also with a explicit desire to go and see and understand what was going on, not just the sort of jingoistic kind of sign up, and there was more of a kind of depth of understanding in the whole process that he was seeking, and he seems to have perhaps seen so much that all he really wants to do is fuck it all and shoot him in the head, as you say.
Yeah, and it's a tough film for that reason primarily. I mean, there's other aspects of it that are quite tough. Like I am a dog owner who is very obsessed with his dog, loves his dog a great deal. So for me, a film with, it's got quite a horrible scene at the dog pound. It's got like obviously this element of this nice dog that they're obviously going to have to shoot because it's racist. So that's tough. But the main tough thing about the film that's hard to swallow is this attitude, right, of like, you can't fix a racist, you have to shoot them in the head. And that is what the film's going towards. And it's kind of in that way, I put this in a way that's kind of like possibly slightly difficult to express. When we worked in an art house cinema in Brighton, right? It's easy enough. Brighton, for context for other listeners, is a place that is a famously kind of leftist bastion in the south of England that is otherwise relatively right wing. So we were in a fairly left wing, what you would now call woke area, working in a kind of fairly left wing woke job. And when you're in that bubble, as you could imagine Hollywood is to some extent, it can sometimes be more annoying. People who are kind of on your side almost, right, of some of those things, it can just be more annoying than it is like the actual kind of enemy, if you will, because you don't really meet them and you can kind of see them very clearly. You're like, yeah, that's a racist. I hate them. But I they're not a hypocrite. I get it. You know what I mean? There's this weird like clarity. There's a weird clarity with the kind of right wing guy where you're like, yeah, like, okay, yeah, you're a twat, but you start to get more irrationally irritated by other like liberal.
It's when I think it's when people evangelize one particular left wing cause and are completely not indifferent, but are kind of completely suppress their kind of liberal outrage for something else because it's convenient for them to have a nice new iPhone or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Or buy all their stuff on Amazon.
There's lots of things like that. There's just a lot of things you see that are sort of irritating. And I think I don't feel as strongly about this as Fuller does, but I think that's kind of the context for his worldview and his films. Like, he is someone who, from his vocations of being a journalist, of being a filmmaker, is I think someone who's probably surrounded by a lot more well-meaning liberal people than racists, other than when he was shooting racists. And I think the target of this film, and from what I've read, the book, is more sort of irritation at well-meaning liberals than it is the racists, because you've got this racist, right? The problem in this film,
it certainly comes across in the main character to a certain degree as well, doesn't it? Like,
it does, because
Kirsty McNichol, obviously, she's like insisting that she wants a dog and she wants to cure it, and the guy that she goes to take him to train it out, the dog is black, and so he's like, no, nothing can be done here. Nothing can be done here. And she's like, please try. And he does. And then later in the film, when there is another instance where somebody gets killed by the dog, she completely changes her tune. And he's like, no, we need to kill him now. And by this time, the guy's pop committed. And he's like, no, fuck that. I've done all this work.
Yeah. And I'm going to see it through. That's the thing I was going to say about it is that the problem in the film, and I don't say this from a position of agreement, it's an observation. The problem in the film is well-meaning liberal intervention, isn't it? Because the thing is that it's very people.
Yeah, if the dog is left to die at the start of the film, then nothing else goes wrong.
Nothing else happens. But not just the dog is left to die. Like, there's a point in the film before I think it's killed anyone that we know of, where somebody says, this is a dangerous dog, you should put this dog down. And she's like, no, I can change him. And then it kills a person. And then, like you say, someone else is like, no, we've got to try and cure the racist dog. So it's like the enemies in the film, the people that actually get anyone killed, are people that, like, staunchly on the side of we can reform the racist. Those are the people that get everyone killed. The dog, there are several points in the film where people could just kill the dog, you know? and so the actual target of the ire and the kind of satire of the film is more these people that kind of think they can reform racism. And I think I said this in my Letterboxd review. I think that's a really bleak, cynical, and I think untrue worldview if you look at it really literally as being about an individual. Like like Shane Meadows, for example. Shane Meadows was famously he was a skinhead racist, right? Before he made This Is England. He came from that world, and he's, as far as we know, no longer a racist. Like, there are provable things in society where people can stop being racist. There are TED Talks of people going, why I left the Ku Klux Klan and all that kind of thing. So we can see that that's not true. But I think it makes more sense if you take it as being about, if the dog isn't an individual, if the dog is systemic, You know, like if you see the dog as just a person who can't be reformed, I think it's hopeless and maybe a bit stupid. If you see the dog as like systemic institutional racism and how you need to tackle that head on and you need to meet that forcefully, and how any attempts to go, oh, but let's hear them out, like it's almost like he's saying, no, you can't be woolly about racists, right? You can't be woolly about institutional racism. You need to be really tough with that. You need to approach that head on. And I think one of the ways that manifests itself in the film is when she visits the hospital of a black actress who's been attacked by her dog on set, because the main character is an actress. She takes the dog to set and it attacks her black co-star. And when she visits the woman in the hospital, this black woman, she already knows it's because it's a white dog that's been trained to attack black people. And the woman says to her, like, oh, I just can't work it out. Why did the dog attack me? I don't understand. And she can't say, oh yeah, apparently it's a racist dog, it attack you because you're black. She's just like, yeah, I don't know. And it's this thing from that character's side, from the white main character's side, of like not really even ever being able to engage with the racism. She can't really talk about it. She can't really look at it. She can't really acknowledge it. And I think those are the issues. There's this sort of like, maybe I'm giving the film more nuance than it has. I think the film is quite forceful, and I think Fuller's quite forceful. But I do think that there's maybe some truth to that. And I think that reading, even if it's not the intended one, makes the film make more sense to me. Because I think, as I say, it's very clearly just like an individual racist needs to be killed. I find that harder to pass than a kind of a statement on how forceful you need to be with like systemic entrenched racism as a force.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I mean, I can also see the film. This film also can potentially work on a completely surface level as like a B-movie thriller, where the dog is symbolic of nothing more than people who mistreat animals. Do you know what I mean? And at that level, that's where I think the idea of it becoming or being remade as elevated horror, or sort of being that kind of tight 90-minute that tight 90-minute horror kind of thing. I think it is, you're right, it is bleak, but I think there was a certain part of my mind as I watched it, because it looks like that and because it feels like that, I could just disengage with the wider implications of it all and treat it as just, you know, when we're not going to sort out racism, but maybe we can sort out the racist dogs. You know, we'll start.
Enough racist dogs. We don't need them. Yeah,
we'll start. We'll start at the bottom, and we'll work our way up through the systemic problems.
Yeah, and there are some really good sequences in it from that angle. Like, there's a proper like Dennis Nedry in Jurassic Park death, which I bring up because we've talked extensively about how influenced by Fuller Spielberg is. But you know, like the dog jumps in the car and like attacks someone in the car.
Yeah.
Jurassic Park adjacent. And then you have like the really well done one in the church where he chases the guy down the street. The guy runs into the church.
That's very John Carpenter. That.
Yeah. The guy kind of going off behind the pews and us hearing the noise of it all. Like that's so well done. So it does operate on that level. It does work on that level.
And also the kind of the intruder sequence at the start where the dog saves her from the intruder is very Brian De Palma as well. I got, you know, shades of his sort of early sexual sexual thrillers, you know, the kind of the Dress to Kills and Body Doubles and things like that. It's definitely sits in that kind of space, I think.
Yeah, no, I understand what you mean there. I think as well in that sequence, he builds up really good tension with the conceit of having the loud war movie on, so the dog can't hear or associate, you know, separate that there's actually violence going on in the house. And then there's that lull where the movie goes quiet and he hears the attacker and then he goes, which is like a really well done sequence. And also like the way, I don't know what happened on the set of this film. I don't know how the dog was treated. I really don't have any idea about that. the performance, for want of a better word, that they get out of the dog is amazing. Like, they have so many really good, but like, honestly, like, there are so many shots in this film that are just the dog's face. So many, like, more than I've seen in any other movie. Like, maybe there's films like Homeward Bound and Lassie or whatever that spend more time with the dog, but like, this is one of the films that I've seen with like the most of like a dog in it. And the dog is, they managed to get like really good stuff out of this dog.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was 5. I'm just looking through the credits now. I'm trying to get to it. I think there was like 5 dogs that they used.
Okay.
But yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, film's set around animal trainers for the screen, isn't it? So you'd expect.
Yeah.
They must have had a really good set of trainers on there.
I want to ask.
I really feel like I want to credit the dogs. So I'm just going to spin through and get the dogs' actual names. But yeah, go on. Sorry.
I was just going to ask, like you said at the beginning, we've kind of covered at the beginning how it was made to be released in 1982, was shelved for years, released in 2008. The reputation around it being, oh, isn't that film racist, and the idea that Paramount was scared to release it because of the idea that they were starting to get protests and people being unhappy about the idea of the film being made. So my question is, given the film seems so militantly anti-racist that it seems to be preaching the message shoot racists, what was the thing that people misunderstood about it, or the thing that upset people that got the film shelved? Is there anything that you've read about that?
Yeah, I've got an extended section from the autobiography that I was going to read, actually, and I'll do that in a sec. But also, just to give you the context of, so first of all, the dogs sound like Sam Fuller characters from earlier films. So the dog was played by Hans, Folsom, Son, Buster, and Duke.
That could be a group of Fuller characters.
Yeah. They could be Merrill's Marauders.
They could be in Steel Helmet, yeah. For sure.
So off the back of this, he's been hanging out with, off the back of Big Red 1, he's been disappointed by them recutting his film, not doing, well received, but not doing brilliantly. He goes off, hangs out with Wim Wenders for a little while, has a role in one of his films, starts prepping a film to be shot in Japan, which I think is called Go Get Harry. I can't remember the exact title, but it's something like that. That falls through and ends up getting remade in Mexico by I think it's Steve Rosenthal. I think he directed one of the Halloween films. So
if you told me there was a film called Go Get Harry, I would assume it starred Michael Caine.
Yeah, I can't remember who's in that at all. But he goes to make this. I think Don Johnson is involved in the early stages with the producing and the pitching this to White Dog to Fuller, and he gets really animated by it, and he throws himself into that. Like, he's like, yeah, I know this story, I can tell this story, and he was clearly right about that. The filming seems to go quite well according to his autobiography. He initially wants Jodie Foster in the main role, but ends up with Kirsty McNichol, or considers Jodie Foster. But anyway, he talks about exactly what happens with the row afterwards. So I'm going to read. It might be a bit extended, this. So then something strange and ugly happened. An NAACP spokesperson named Willis Edwards showed up on our set one day. He'd cleared his visit with the studio to see if our film was distorting the image of black people. I was flabbergasted. Why hadn't an organization as prestigious as the NAACP done their homework and checked out my record before sending a man to spy on my work? If they had, they would have found out that I was one of Hollywood's first directors to use actors of color in intelligent, complex roles. The Black Medic in Steel Helmet, Nat King Cole's Sensitive Soldier in China Gate, Harry Rhodes' twisted college dropout in Shock Corridor, James Shigeta's detective who gets the gal in Crimson Kimono. Our world was multiracial, And I've been depicting it that way since my first picture. And why hadn't they checked out my military record, for Christ's sake? So I put my life on the line to stand up for democracy, fighting fascism, because it was antagonistic to the Jefferson principle, that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator and with certain unalienable rights, among those life, liberty, and the goddamn pursuit of happiness. After depicting the little guy and his right to be different in movie after movie, no matter what economic status or race, I thought I'd made my position on integration and equality crystal clear. What right did this man have to snoop around, making a nuisance of himself, no matter how honourable the objectives of the organisation? The NAACP should at the very least have the courtesy and respect to wait to see the finished movie. I was deeply offended by this intrusion, and I told John Davison in no uncertain terms that I did not want to see Mr. Edwards on my set. Davison agreed and completely asked the NAACP man to leave. So that's what happened. And then rumours just kind of started to snowball about this being a racist film.
Right.
The studio...
So the
studio get nervous, and shelve it.
It sounds like it's from that. This might be wrong. It sounds like he didn't let Walter Peck look at the containment unit, and it's all spun out from there.
Basically, yeah. Basically, so that's what happened. You know, and I think we've talked about this extensively as we watch these films and how they come out of his films. You know, he's right with what he's done with his depiction or intended to do with his sort of depiction. I think he took it as a personal affront that he was being checked up on, essentially. And you know, there is a little bit of, you can see that also gelling with his kind of bombastic with his bombastic personality, just basically getting offended by it all and throwing his toys out the pram a little bit. But it ends up with the film being shelved, not being released until 10 years later in a few art house cinemas as a curio, as people are like rediscovering his work, I guess. And that's it. That's the end of Hollywood for him. He leaves America after that and exiles himself to Paris for pretty much the rest of his life. But after this point, he's done with making movies in America and indeed living in America.
It's interesting because we've talked before about his influence on the French New Wave directors. He's obviously featured in one of the Godard movies. Is it Contempt, or I can't remember which one it is, but he's in one of the he's in one of the Godard movies.
And he's just come out of the Wim Wenders. He's come out of all Wim Wenders film as well, because he's gone off and made, his wife is German, and he's made film.
Dead Pigeon on Beethoven Street was the Germany one, right?
The one we couldn't find.
Yeah, but then you get this thing where I think his final movie is a French film as well, right? And it ties in here in a way I find very interesting, because this film to me, I know it's based on a French book, but this film to me feels so French. And the reason I say that is, like, and I know it's not written, like, the film was written with, we've not mentioned yet, the film was co-written with Curtis Hanson, who obviously goes on to be another pretty significant American filmmaker, you know, LA Confidential and so forth. So it's not French in terms of anything on the production of the film, but the way it feels French to me, and maybe this comes from the source material, is that
slightly nihilist.
But the conventional wisdom with Hollywood movies is the dog can't die, right? Like, very basically, don't shoot a dog, right? And when you think of the story of this movie and about can we cure racism,
it's a story about shooting a dog, isn't it? Essentially,
it is. It's all building up to the shooting of a dog, and the American ending to this story, right? Conventionally, I'm not saying every American filmmaker, the Hollywood ending to this story is, yay, we stopped the dog racism.
Yeah,
I feel like it's a very French ending to this story. You cannot fix racism, and they shoot the dog, and then the film ends. And it feels to me like that would be the ending if this was like Robert Bresson's White Dogs. You know what I mean? Like, that's what it felt like to me. And so it just had that kind of bleakness, and that obviously like comes out of maybe the French book. But it feels like if this movie was again like shot in the French language in the 80s or something, it would have had like a whole different life. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. Interesting what you say about the American version, because now all I've got in my head is the sort of DreamWorks family-friendly version, animated version of
White Dog, yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, but no, yeah, totally agree. There is definitely the other thing about it, and I think it also part of the sort of nastiness of it, if you like, and the power and the violence of it comes from simply put, like the time that it was made. So, and by that I mean like the production design and the film stock and that look of late 70s, early 80s exploitation films. There's something quite, if you watch any film from the 80s, you can almost pinpoint the year by the production design and the film stock. Like films from 1984 to 1987 look very different, purely aesthetic and kind of film stock grading level than anything in the first 4 years and anything between sort of 87 and 90. You can almost tell if something is early 80s, mid 80s, or late 80s just by looking at a frame in a way that you probably can't do with anything you can do less so in the sort of the 90s and maybe even less so in the 2000s and 2010s. But there's something particularly grimy about that look in the early 80s. And it made me think, like, I really, really made me want to see the sort of 1982 or 1983 version of Shot Corridor or The Naked Kiss or Verboten or something like that. You know, something where he had the sort of money and he could maybe push things a little bit further in terms of what you saw. Because, you know, there is blood and violence and a little bit of gore in this film as well. It's quite explicit, and it made me wonder what those kind of very bombastic, shocking films from the early 60s would look like if they were made 20 years later. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And he's a filmmaker where
like you can imagine the almost, because you know the dialogue is full of dialogue, it's always on the nose, but you can imagine that script being in one of his 1960s black and white films, and having a different feel. Do you know what I mean? But anyway,
I do know what you mean, and I agree. I think your Letterboxd review even says, like, I wish he made more films in the 80s, and I agree with you. Like, I think there would be a kind of a pleasure to seeing him make more films with that aesthetic you mentioned, but also like the added license to be a bit more violent, kind of post-code kind of approach to things. So yeah, definitely. I agree. Well, I can't remember the thing I was going to say about Fuller now, but I agree with you about that. I was going to say, I think that an interesting thing for me with Fuller is because his films are quite unpolished and quite lacking nuance in a way that's charming, but is, you know, they're quite blunt.
I mean, they are thrown together. They're thrown together sort of nuts and bolts. You know, if in terms of craft, if someone like Clint Eastwood is making sort of, you know, finely kind of finished oak furniture, Fuller's throwing together flat packs and moving on to the next one.
It's interesting you mention Eastwood, because he also works very quickly and does very few takes, doesn't he? But yeah, I know what you mean. Eastwood has a kind of a sheen to it. But I was going to say, like, he's a filmmaker where, because of that nature of his work, like, even my favorite Fuller films are rough diamonds.
Yeah,
I think he's one filmmaker where I would not be upset if any of his films got remade. Like, if you heard, like, when Spike Lee remakes Old Boy, you have that thing of like, why are you remaking Old Boy? Don't do that. That's silly. But if Spike Lee said he was remaking Steel Helmet, or he was remaking like shot corridor, like you say. If a director decided, if Martin Scorsese, like he did with Cape Fear, if Martin Scorsese said he was going to do a new take on White Dog, or he was going to do a new take on Crimson Kimono, that would be exciting. Like, I do think that a lot of these thriller films, and that's not to diminish the original or say that the remake would be better. I just think that a lot of them have like really interesting concepts, and they could be done by another filmmaker in a way, like you mentioned, kind of with that license to be a bit more explicit now. That would just be a really interesting take on that material.
Well, this is interesting, actually. I wish we'd thought about this earlier on in the podcast, because it would have been nice to have sort of, as we'd gone along, figured out who we wanted to do the remake. And maybe when we do our final,
Yeah.
when we do our final podcast, rather than doing like our top
A
5 or
ranking.
whatever, we'll choose 3 each and the filmmaker that we'd like to remake them.
It's the remakes, yeah. Let's do that. So I've got some notes. I'm going to talk about a few things we've not mentioned so far from my notes. So I mentioned Curtis Hanson as the co-writer. He's not the only kind of starry name on this, because Ennio Morricone does the music, which is interesting. I did not know that going in, that this film had an Ennio Morricone score. So that was pretty cool. And it's a good one as well. Like, the music in this film's great. I wrote down, as I always have when we've watched these films for this podcast, I did write down some of the most fuller dialogue, some of the most just like
amazing,
just blunt, lacking nuance dialogue.
Oh yeah, I've got some blunt, lacking nuance, mise en scène as well for you. But yeah, give me the dialogue.
There's when the dog fights the rapist off in the first act. A cop walks over when the cops turn up and they come and get the rapist. A cop just kind of mutters to another cop, "Same damn rapist I nailed last year." And he's just really annoyed that it's the same damn rapist. And then another cop says after that to the lady, "You're lucky to have a dog like that, lady," which was really funny to me in context, because it happens so quickly. You get like a scene where her boyfriend says, "Oh, you're a woman living alone in the hills. You should keep the dog because that will keep you safe." And she's like, "No, I don't want to keep the dog." Then she literally, like, that night gets attacked and the dog saves her. And then a guy's like, "You're lucky to have a dog, lady." It's like, there's no elegance to that.
It's functional, isn't it? It's like, this is what needs to happen, so we're going to do it and we're going to move on.
Yeah, that's it. We're going to do it. We're going to do it really easy. She doesn't want it. She refuses the call of having a racist dog, and then this happens. What was your mise en scène you were going to mention?
It's the bit just before the death in the church where the dog gets out of the cage where the trainer's keeping him, and he goes on a little jaunt and ends up killing a man. But there's a bit where he's sort of nosing through some rubbish bins on the corner, and there's like a little shop just down there. So if you imagine the screen on the right hand side, you've got the side of the wall and the street going down that way, and then there's the bins, and the dog's here, and just popping out of the door is like a 5-year-old black child, comes out, starts blowing up a balloon, just sort of walks out, stands bang in the middle of the street, looks at the camera, starts blowing up a balloon as the dog looks like it's coming around the corner. And then his mother just sort of comes out and takes him back in just in time. It's quite, I mean, it's effective when you watch it, but I just happened to pause on it, and I was like, yeah, that's a small kid blowing up a balloon. It's quite funny. If you stop and think about it. But anyway,
I've got a few other notes. So some of them not particularly smart. Just dog pound too sad, I wrote down. It's very sad. And then I wrote so distressing at that point. There's a bit where she finds out she didn't get the part in a movie she auditioned for, and her agent tells her that Jessica Drummond got the part. Do you know who that is?
No.
Jessica Drummond, because it rang a bell. I was like, who's Jessica Drummond? Jessica Drummond is the name of Barbara Stanwyck's character in 40 Guns.
Right.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. Yeah, that's like a cool little Fuller Easter egg. I wonder if that came from Curtis Hanson rather than him, because it feels more like Curtis Hanson would be like a Fuller fan, being like, "Oh, we should reference your work," rather than Fuller being like, "I'm going to reference my work."
And I mean that tracks for me. That tracks for me as well, because certainly 40 Guns. If you were if Fuller was, like, we talked quite a lot about Hipster's Choice when we were when we did Kurosawa, and I think just saying Sam Fuller, that is Hipster's Choice to a certain degree. I think you don't need to deep dive into Fuller. Like, you say Fuller, that's fine. But if within the circles of Hollywood at that time and writers at that time, 40 Guns is a prime candidate for Hipster's Choice Fuller, I think, because it is really good. And it wasn't as well known, it's not as celebrated as Shot Corridor or Naked Kiss or anything. I think that might be that. You're right. That sounds like Curtis Hanson showing off his Fuller credentials.
It does, doesn't it? Because Fuller is not a particularly like self-referential director in general.
Apart from Griff, is it Griff?
The Griff thing, the recurring Griff thing, yeah. But that feels more like, isn't that like someone he knew that he likes to pay homage to? So he's not really paying homage to like himself in that way. So yeah, there was. I'm trying to find something that I read the other day that fits into this conversation. But what else have I got in here? Racism can't be cured, which we've discussed. There's a great line, right? Where genuinely great line, like not a Fuller line, like an actually really good line, where the he goes to the animal training place, not the Hollywood animal training place, and the guy who runs it, I think it's called Carruthers. Carruthers is originally like, "You just got to kill that dog, like kill that dog immediately." And he's got this like R2D2 on the wall, and he throws darts at it because R2D2 is going to stop people wanting to see animals in movies, whatever. And Carruthers says, because he's before he knows about the white dog, and he starts talking to her like, "Hey, what do you want, lady? You here for a tiger or whatever?" And he says, "We've got the smartest gorilla in the business. He plays great in documentaries," which I think is an amazing line. Like the idea, because obviously Fuller's got that like background in like journalism and all that kind of thing, and it just feels like he's like being really cynical about things that purport to be the truth in some instances.
It's weird you say that, because obviously it's so weird you say that, obviously, because I teach a course on documentary film at the university, and we were talking about observational cinema and looking particularly at nature docs and Attenborough, and how when you watch it, if you understand film at all, you know that that's not a continuous sequence. It can't be. There's no way you can capture that, and they use takes from different places, and that's caused those kind of faux outrages on the BBC before, when they've gone, well, that polar bear was actually in a zoo kind of thing, and you go, calm down. But there was a new show that started about a week ago about tiny little animals who have to make short journeys that feel like big journeys because they're tiny. And it actually says, as a disclaimer now, on the front of those shows, sequences in this program have been made using multiple animals. So, like, there's documentary ethics have got to a point now where you have to tell people, like, to avoid confusion. Sometimes we have to edit them, and I find it bizarre. Maybe that's just because of my documentary background, that people would get upset that you'd use two different animals. But I didn't pick up on that, but yeah, I can see him getting upset about
that. It's a good line, I thought, because it's just this kind of, I don't know, it just seems really cynical about things that purport to be fact, things that purport to be true, not in a Trumpy way. Like, there's a good Fuller line in the classic Fuller mold where the trainer, the black trainer, has a black trainer friend who's like, "I quit this job if you train this dog," and he says to his friend, like, "Look, I can't remember the guy's name. Look, Jimmy, take 5 weeks off. By the time you come back, if I don't break him, I'll shoot him."
The only other thing we haven't really talked about is, and I bring it up for a piece of trivia more than anything else, but thinking about it, it did kind of, again, I think actually even more so than some of the, even more so than the chase sequences and the church sequence and the one that really made me think of A24 rather than John Carpenter was the scene where she meets the dog's owner and he's with his grandchildren, because there's something slightly sort of Texas Chainsaw-y about it. Do you know what I mean? This sort of slightly big avuncular granddad with his two sweet granddaughters, one of which is played by Samantha Fuller, his daughter. But that scene in of itself is so creepy with how avuncular and friendly the fella is. That's the bit that made me really think, I wonder what the can't even think of his name. Who is the Midsummer fella?
Oh, Ari Aster.
Yeah, it made me think, what is the Ari Aster version of this film? But yeah. I brought that up for trivia, but we hadn't talked about that sequence either, so I thought I'd mention it.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it was just me punctuating the end of my point by mumbling.
Yeah. This is going to be a bit of a stretch, I think, but there was almost a sort of neo-noir aspect to that guy, because you've got this movie and it's set in California, it's set in LA, and when you think of all of those like classic noir films, but also those like kind of Altman neo-noirs and those kind of things, even up to things like Inherent Vice and the more recent stuff, there's always like corrupt white powerful men who will not pay the
fishing, or being talked to while they're fishing, or they're on the golf course, or
and they will not pay the price for this thing. Like, they've set events in motion, they are to blame, they have people doing their dirty work, but they're laughing, sneering, untouchable. And there's that thing with him where he's like a wealthy man with like quite a nice house, and he has done this. Like, he's the guy who's trained the dog to be racist. The dog will end the film with bullets in its head, but this guy, he does not face any sort of comeuppance, really, other than the woman says to his grandchildren that he's a bad man, but that's it.
Yeah. There's definitely a touch of, if we go back to Hanson as well, it's a touch of the kind of Pierce Patchett's LA Confidential kind of scene, isn't it? But I mean, I'm starting to run out of things to say about this now, I think. I don't know if you've got anything else left.
My only thing left was that, when he's fighting the dog in the big padded outfit and he's rolling around with the dog, that looked fun.
Yeah, I find all sorts, anything like that fun. Something that looks really dangerous, but you've clearly got very good protective gear with you.
Yeah.
Anything like that. Like, there was a
like
show,
I would probably. Sorry.
There's a show. There's like a Stand Up to Cancer reality show with celebrities on in the UK at the moment, called Don't Look Down, where they're going to have to like walk a tightrope. But in the first episode, I only caught a glimpse of it. They're free falling off a bridge with bungee cords, basically 200, and they're going, oh no, it's just so scary. Whereas my kind of thought about that is that people do that. That's somebody's business to do that. They make a living out of it. They put a bungee cord on you and you're in a harness and you're going to be perfectly fine. That looks like loads of fun. Like, so, a vicious attack dog, if you were dressed up like the Michelin Man, I'd probably have a go at that.
Yeah, exactly. It looked a laugh, especially because it is a trained acting dog. So it's only having a play fight. I'd love to have a big play fight with a big German Shepherd. Anyway, that's not really anything. So I enjoyed it. I think it's good. I don't. Yeah, it's hard to understand with the full context of the film and having seen it why it had to spend so long on the naughty list. It seems like a misunderstanding. But,
Absolutely, and I think this is. I think it's
yeah.
just a speed of information thing, isn't it? Like, if you can't see it at the cinema, if you can't see get it on video, or if it's not on TV and there's no way of getting hold of it, or even you haven't even got access to even full marketing for films. If you want to find out about a film that came out 3 or 4 years ago in the 80s and 90s, you've got to try and get hold of a 3 or 4 year old magazine.
Or find a Leonard Maltin's guide or whatever.
Exactly. So if all you can find is scraps of misinformation, then I understand why these things used to take so long. It's quite interesting as well, actually. I mean, I'm going off on so many tangents, but like in the sort of social media misinformation age as well, like ghost stories and urban legends are starting to make a real comeback. Like, do you remember like at the dawn of the internet age, where it was sort of like, oh, of course, ghosts and spontaneous combustion and all this stuff is complete bollocks. But now things are posted so much quicker. I've noticed on a lot of my feeds, like, maybe it's also what I'm dialed into, being into horror, but like the idea of is almost making a comeback now. Like, you get so many scraps of incomplete or inaccurate information about things. I think it might be becoming easier again to be completely misinformed about something like this. Happened a little while ago with that Netflix film. Do you remember I think it's called Cuties, the French film about the young girls who wanted to be in a dance troupe, and it was marketed so terribly by Netflix, like 12-year-old girls wearing like
Cuties.
Yeah. And then the narrative around that film in 150 word bursts was, this sick pedophile film. When you watch the film, you realize it's quite a sober meditation on the sexualization of underage girls. And I can see why this, when you watch it, you go, I don't know what the fuss was about, but I can see why there was a fuss at that time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does make certain amount of sense. Picking up what you said earlier about how this is kind of in that era as well of, like, Straw Dogs, Clockwork Orange, things like that being banned in the UK, having a bit of a weird, like, culty buzz around them because you couldn't watch them. I was thinking, oh, you don't really get that now. And then I was thinking, this is a complete tangent, but I was thinking, maybe you do. Maybe that's what Batgirl is now. You know what I mean? There are all these films being, like, shelved because of tax write-offs that at some point will see the light of day, whether they're leaked or they're, like, I don't know, somebody acquires the rights to them, or I don't know how that works. But at some point, it's basically a finished movie. Somewhere down the line, we will end up seeing that movie. And it's just going to have that, like, that Batgirl movie, if it had come out, would have just been, like, immediately forgotten. There would have been, like, a day of discourse around something in it, a meme, a joke, it's bad, whatever, and it would have disappeared. Whereas now it's probably going to get a couple of decades of this, like, weird dust of, like, what was this thing? Why did they shelve it? Is it that bad? What does Michael Keaton's Batman do in it? There's just these questions about it now where, like, do you remember, like, there was all that, this isn't really the same thing, but it's kind of adjacent. Like, I remember there being all that stuff about Superman 2 for years and years, and how the Donner cut was going to be, like, revelatory thing. It was like a really, like, hyped up thing, the Donner cut. And obviously that was, like, peak DVD era, so the Donner cut eventually got, like, a big release and they kind of put it back together. But I feel like we've obviously kind of left that kind of physical media age to some extent, but this feels like something that would have come out, like, got it like DVD like 20 years after the fact.
Absolutely. Yeah, and interesting to raise that after we've just watched the reconstruction of the Big Red One as well, which is exactly that sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, true. That is his Donner cut, isn't it, really?
That is his Donner cut.
We need to bring back Donner cut into the vernacular rather than Snyder cut.
Yeah.
What is the Snyder cut but a poor man's Donner cut? Anyway, yeah, I enjoyed it. I think it's a good one. It's probably top half for me. Top half Fuller, upper top half Fuller even.
Yeah, I mean, I've bought up Letterbox just to prepare for the next one, but I'd sorted it by release date. So just give me a second. I'm going to change it by popularity. It's second.
I mean, it's first row popularity.
First row, second, yeah. It's just after Shot Corridor, before Pick Up on South Street and Naked Kiss. In fact, Big Red One doesn't make it until the second row. So, yeah.
If I organise by my rating, White Dog is third row Fuller,
right?
Which is not bad because there's 2 rows below that.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Okay.
So what we got next? What is it? Is it Thieves After Dark?
Well, we are hitting quite a difficult period. So obviously we skipped Dead Pigeon, and that we skipped it for a couple of reasons. One, it was a TV movie, and which wasn't necessarily a deciding factor, but we just couldn't find it. So the decision was made. The next film is Thieves After Dark, but as far as I can tell so far, I've spent a bit of time, but not extensively. As far as I can tell so far, I can't find it anywhere, not even on Russian Facebook.
Okay.
What I have been able to find is Street of No Return, which is a theatrical release. So that starring Keith Carradine. A rock star turned bum, his vocal cords severed at the height of his career for the love of a woman, drunkenly roams the city, torn apart by sponsored race riots. When accused of murder, he may have the chance to get revenge on the magnate who maimed him, which sounds pretty good.
I would suggest then that for the last episode of this podcast, we see what we can of all the remaining things. Clips, full things if we can find them, and then we just kind of round off and discuss his last few projects.
Yeah.
So yeah, that sounds like a thing.
Because I do like the sound of the Madonna and the Dragon as well, but it was another one I couldn't find, which is expose of 2 news photographers covering the People's Revolution in the Philippines, which sounds really interesting. And Thieves After Dark is a Paris set Bonnie and Clyde film about a couple pursued for a murder they'd never committed. So they all sound like they've got interesting premises. But yeah, I'm with you. We'll look for trailers and clips and see what we can find of probably those 2, and maybe watch. I've just said it and I can't remember it.
Street of No Return.
Street of No Return. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Well, yeah, that about does it then for White Dog. Come back next time for the final episode, where we hope to have finally attained a fuller understanding. In the meantime, yeah, I've been Rob. He's been Craig. And yeah, thanks for listening.
Bye.